All right, John, I'm letting everybody on.
All right. Greetings, everyone. I'm John Handy, Communications Director for the House Republican Caucus, and I'd like to welcome you to our Republican media availability. With us today on the House side are House Republican Leader J.T. Wilcox from the 2nd Legislative District and Representative Gina Mossbrucker from the 14th Legislative District. And she is also a Caucus Vice Chair and Ranking Republican on the House Public Safety Committee. And from the Senate, we have Senate Republican Leader John Braun of the 20th Legislative District and Senator Judy Warnick of the 13th Legislative District. And Judy is also a Caucus Vice Chair and Ranking Republican on the Senate Agriculture, Water, Natural Resources, and Parks Committee. And with that, I will turn it over to Representative Mossbrucker for some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, John. And I think that what we wanted to address today, or at least start with, and then of course answer your questions, was State v. Blake. This ruling came out on the 25th of February at 8:32 in the morning and created a 60-page ruling, which we feel like will have really high risk to public safety due to the outcome and the fallout of this legislation. So what the House Republicans did is we've been working on a package of bills to present in response to that. So I'll briefly run through those bills, and then I'm sure we're happy to answer any questions on any topics you have today. So the first thing that we thought about was due process, and we wanted to add knowingly back into the statute. It's a simple fix. It's a one-word fix. And basically it says it's unlawful for any person to possess a controlled substance without a valid prescription. And all we're asking is to put that one word back in there and make sure that it's knowingly to possess. So that Representative Jesse Young is going to carry that for us. And he's been doing an excellent job on that on House Bill 1560. The second fix that we came up with in response was by Representative Brad Clippert, and we want to be able to look at local jurisdictions to make decisions regarding that. So it removes state preemption in order to relate it to the possession offenses. So if Seattle wants to have it okay for simple possession to be taken out and invalid, then we want to make sure that maybe a small town like mine in Eastern Washington can pass ordinances, enact ordinances to make sure that that's not the case here. We have grave concerns about that being blanketed across the state of Washington. That will, he'll be pushing that forward, and he's doing a great job on 1562. The third fix we came up with had to do with what we learned in a bill, House Bill 1499 from Lauren Davis, Democrat. She had a very large bill, and parts of it were excellent. We were absolutely in support of it, but there was enough of it in it that we ended up having to vote no. We took those pieces with her consent, and we've been working with her, and created House Bill 1558. Representative Dan Griffey is going to be carrying that, and it looks at ways to promote recovery. So I think there's not one person in the legislature who doesn't want to get help for those who are addicted to substance abuse. But what this does is it sets up the behavioral health systems in order to be able to do that, because we would argue there's not enough infrastructure to take care of those who are suffering today. So it adds law enforcement training to give officers the chance to learn how to interact with someone who's maybe under the influence of heroin or meth or fentanyl, which are allowed for simple possession under State v. Blake. It also looks at low barrier recovery systems to make sure that we can reach those who need help the most. And also it'll make sure that it addresses aftercare, which Representative Davis did a great job of educating us on how important it is to do that wraparound service. Not just put them in treatment, but to make sure that they have a path out where they can stay in a healthy state of mind. Also, it looks at an advisory committee in that one, and so Dan Griffey is going to be carrying that for us. The fourth bill is Representative Jenny Graham's looking at, and she's making it so that when we want to increase the offenses for penalties and we want to make sure that we're making it more difficult to manufacture drugs in the state of Washington, to distribute or to conduct any business regarding the controlled substance or the counterfeit. There's a large market of counterfeit in the state of Washington. It also makes sure that it written currently in the statute, it's a crime to endanger the use of a controlled substance, the child, but it's only for methamphetamines. It doesn't include any of the other drugs, which are going to fall under State v. Blake, which is the fentanyl and heroin. So it expands that and makes sure that we also make illegal the products used to make those drugs, such as methamphetamines. And lastly, the fix that we're looking at, I'll be carrying, and that has to do with, under State v. Blake, we didn't address the age of children. There's not a prohibition, whether it's a 10-year-old with heroin or meth, or whether it's a 35-year-old. So this says that it's never okay to do nothing. And House Republicans want to argue that we shouldn't be able to see a child in danger on the street and just walk away, not give law enforcement the ability to make sure that they can help them get the help they need and make sure that they don't live a life of addiction. So that, in closing, I will turn it back over to take questions, or we can go to our leader, J.T. Wilcox, or Senator Braun, or Rep. Warnock, Senator Warnock.
I think we're ready for questions.
All right, let's go to questions. We will start with Rachel LaCourte of the Associated Press.
Hi, good morning. I just wanted to get reaction from you all if you had seen the emergency rule that was issued by Insurance Commissioner Mike Kreidler today on credit scoring.
I had actually been alerted by a constituent who texted me about an hour ago, but it's too new, and I kind of like to have a little time to absorb it before I have an opinion about the rule itself. I will express a lot of concern about the fact that the barrier seems to be down on emergency rules of all kinds. And I think responsible members of the legislature and the public should be deeply concerned about the way that emergency rules by various elected officials have become normalized. That's not the way people in Washington expect their government to be conducted. And I think the expansion that we've seen has been bad, and it needs to be reined in.
Yeah, I would just echo JT's comment on the prevalence of emergency rules in recent memory, and the idea that until you mentioned it, I didn't know about this new emergency rule. So I don't know enough about it to comment on it. I would say that there is legislation in front of us to deal with credit scoring during this legislative session. So it seems premature, even if permitted, to issue an emergency rule on an issue that the legislature is actively considering.
Did you have a follow-up, Rachel?
I didn't, thank you.
Okay. Next, we will go to Joe O'Sullivan of the Seattle Times.
Yeah, hi, Representative Mossberger. You mentioned the idea of allowing cities and municipalities to sort of move forward with their own laws regarding drug possession. Why not apply that? When we talk about gun regulations, we talk about the state's preemption. Why not allow local laws for that as well?
I think that this drug is an epidemic, and that this is something that has to take priority over everything else. We see homelessness increased. I think the statistics I saw the other day where we were third in the nation of having the most homelessness, which of course is connected to mental health and connected to drug and substance abuse. So I think that I think this is a matter of saving lives. I think this is a matter of this has to be at the forefront. We have over $3 billion over the next 4 years forecasted. And my opinion is that the majority party should prioritize the safety of people that you and I see on the street every day. Even in Eastern Washington, we're seeing homelessness increase. And I think the statistic again the other day was about 6% of our population was now homeless in the state. So I would say this is absolutely imminent. And that's why that this should be different.
And Joe, this is Senator Warnock. Can I jump in on that one too?
Sure, yeah.
So I live and represent Grant County. Grant County, the commissioners just came out and created or passed an ordinance that it is a gross misdemeanor to knowingly possess a controlled substance except legally allowed marijuana. So the counties, and part of their statement was the legislature is not taking this on soon enough to protect our counties and the people who live here. So they are starting to do that with the blessing of most of the citizens in Grant County and the sheriff. And, you know, we already have a backlog of court cases because of the pandemic. And so if they have to address these State v. Blake cases, we're already meeting. We have a courtroom at our fairgrounds, one of the bigger buildings at our county fairgrounds, to relieve the backlog. So we're not able to accomplish what we need to do now as far as our backlog on courts. This is going to make it worse. And, you know, Representative Mossberger talked a little bit about it, but people who need treatment, sometimes the best way for them to get treatment is to have a court conviction or an arrest. And I've heard people say that over and over. Without being arrested, they would not have gotten the treatment they needed for drug addiction. So I think we need to allow that and look at that. We're not doing it fast enough for some places.
Did you have a follow-up, Joe?
No, that's
Joe,
fine.
did you have a, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. All right, moving on. Next, we will go to Sarah Gensler at McClatchy.
Thank you. Have you had a chance, Representative Mossberger, to look at the Senate bill introduced this morning by Senator Dingra? It looks like the online text isn't available yet, but there's a press release, and the title of the bill is addressing the State v. Blake decision. I'm just wondering if you know, if you have any comments on that proposal, which apparently would, you know, ban public use and possession by minors of controlled substances, but then like set a kind of thresholds for personal use, somewhat like what Oregon has done.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Sarah. No, I haven't seen the text of that yet, and I look forward to seeing it. This issue is not Democrat or Republican or independent. This is an issue that faces all of our families. It doesn't it's not specific to income. It can harm any family in the state of Washington. So I hope that we collaborate and we work together to find the answers and solutions. Senator Warnock did a great job of talking about movement already. We can't wait. And Representative Walsh has a budget proviso to address the fact that this is a very large unfunded mandate to the tunes of millions of dollars back to the courts. And they don't have the money to go back and reprocess and resentence these claims and to petition to the prosecutors. So there's a lot more work than this set of 5 bills, and I hope that we all work together to find a solution.
Hey, Sarah, I wouldn't want to make the mistake of specifically addressing a bill whose language I haven't seen yet, but I would address an idea that I think you brought up, which is you know, there would be no criminal charges perhaps for adults that are knowingly in possession of things like fentanyl and heroin. And, you know, there's hardly a family in Washington that hasn't been touched by this in sometimes the most horrific way. And for many families, the way out started with an arrest and incarceration. And I think that we absolutely have to preserve that possibility. We can work together on what the appropriate sentence is. And of course, that should be dominated by the thought of how do we help this person recover. But to have no real force of law, I think, gives up on saving lives and saving families. Not something that we're ready to do. And I don't think that the people of Washington really want to go that route yet either.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I haven't studied the entire bill, but I did see a summary, maybe the same thing that you saw already, Sarah, but what JT says is my chief concern with the bill. I do appreciate that Senator Dinger has proposed kind of a more comprehensive approach to the problem, but I'm not sure we're quite there yet. It does take this referral to approach, and I just not personally comfortable that provides the structure that's required to get folks who have substance problems back in control of their lives, frankly. So again, appreciate the effort. I think it's good we have the conversation. This is a complicated issue, just like Representative Mossberger laid out. There are many facets of this that have to be addressed, and I'm not certain that we have the time in the legislative process to get this all done. I'm personally a fan of the bill introduced by Senator Mullet last Friday that corrects adds knowingly back into the statute, gets us kind of back to the starting point, gives us 3 years to work through the details to make sure we get it right, both for these individuals who may be using controlled substances and for safety in our community. There's just so many facets that need to be done right and done hopefully in a nonpartisan way or bipartisan way to make sure we're on a good path forward, both for, like I said, the safety of the individuals, safety of the communities.
Sarah, did you have a follow-up question?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Next, we will go to Essex Porter of Cairo.
Yes, hello, good morning. Police in Boulder are now confirming that it was an AR-15 used by the shooter in that mass shooting. An assault weapon style ban here did not make cutoff, neither did high capacity magazine legislation. Would any of you support the extraordinary measures needed to revive that legislation so that the legislature could vote on an assault weapons ban or high capacity magazine limits?
No, I don't think we'd be supporting that.
Why not?
The violence that happened in Colorado it should never be acceptable. That shouldn't be the right answer. But let's be clear, that what was done there is already illegal on many different levels. Adding it one more way it's illegal is not the way you're going to solve this problem. We have to get after the underlying causes, because whether you have access to an AR-15 or some other lethal weapon, if you don't get after the underlying mental health issues, we've talked a lot about that, get after some of the issues I think that have been exacerbated by the pandemic we've experienced over the last year, in the isolation and the restrictions. And that's not to say they aren't in many cases necessary, but it makes it really hard to address these problems and to recognize them and get folks the help they need. So I don't see where jumping on this as yet another reason to make one more thing illegal fixes the underlying problem. It is unacceptable what's happening. I think everybody can agree with that. But the answer is not so simple as make one more law.
Essex, if you have a follow-up? Okay.
Yes, if I could follow up, Joe had the question about local preemption, and it seemed to be okay as applied to the drug statute. But if someone could clarify, why not allow local preemption on gun statutes as well?
Well, I think there's a distinction when you have something that is so powerfully protected in the Washington State Constitution. That shall not be impaired is about as clear as you can possibly get.
Thank you.
Next, we will go to Laurel Demkovich of the Spokesman Review.
Thanks, John. With budget proposals coming out later this week, I'm wondering if you can talk about some of your priorities for federal funding and where you want to see that go. I know Representative Walsh, I believe, has offered up culverts and the Blake decision fallout. Are those things that you also support, or are there any other kind of priorities you want to see?
So, a great question. I think this is probably maybe one of the most important things we deal with in the remainder of the session is how do we work and how do we spend the federal money? And just to be clear, not all of it has to be spent right now. It can be held for several years. So in some cases that might be the right answer, but I think the bigger issue is let's just make sure we do not spend it in ways that create a future bow wave that we just can't afford. And the items you mentioned, culverts is certainly one of them. Other ideas are let's put some of it into the UI trust to avoid additional taxes on our businesses in future years. Other ideas are invest in forest health. It's a one-time expense. Pay down our long-term pension liability. These are all things that should be part of the discussion, and look for things that don't create future liability we can't afford, but put us fundamentally in a better financial position in the state of Washington, both now and in years into the future.
Yeah, I think I would have a test for this. It doesn't give you the exact answer, but it kind of helps put this in perspective. If we were going to look back at our successors look forward to our successors 10 years from now, what would they say? Man, am I glad that House and Senate did this for us when they had the money to do it. I think an improvement in forest health that would result in taking wildfires to some extent off the table for future people to suffer through, that people 10 years from now would be grateful. Not having to worry about underfunded pensions, hard to imagine anything more impactful than that. And if we were to really solve the culvert problem, both at the state level and for local government, I think our successors would be very happy that they don't have that liability hanging over their heads. And our Washington state tribes and sportsmen and people that care about the environment would be overjoyed that we took that step early. Some would say that this is not early, but from the perspective of 10 years from now, maybe it will be, so that we had a foundation for a recovery of salmon and orca. And we use those dollars that kind of fell out of the air into our laps in a way that would benefit our grandchildren who are ultimately going to be paying that bill.
And we've talked a couple times about forest health. I would like to see us direct some of those funds to forest health. I just stepped away from my computer for a few minutes this morning and went to the Port of Moses Lake to watch the super tanker, the newest tool in the firefighting toolbox that DNR has. That is one huge airplane, but Commissioner of Public Lands was there, Lisa Brown from Department of Commerce was there, all to watch that super tanker do its thing. And, the numbers that we're talking about as far as of lost acres, lost lives, lost homes are tremendous. And we're hearing that bill, the Healthy Forest Bill, this afternoon in our Senate Ag Committee. It's 1168. Hopefully we can get that bill through and that we can find the funding to make this bill work. And that is bipartisan. Fires don't pick and choose whether it's a Republican district or a Democrat district or public lands or private lands. And unfortunately, a lot of the fires are on the east side of the state, so we're very aware of it. But I think it's very important that we keep that in the forefront. And like Representative Wilcox said, what's it going to look like 10 years from now if we don't do something now?
Did you have a follow-up, Laura?
Just briefly, Senator Braun, you mentioned that some of this money doesn't need to be spent right away. So do you want to see some of it, kind of saved for future budget cycles, or do you want to use most of it now, or what are your thoughts on that?
So that depends entirely on how we spend it. I am fully on board if we can put it towards one of the items I mentioned earlier, or all of the items I mentioned earlier, better yet, then I am comfortable with that. If we are not going to, address one of those issues, one of those one-time, fundamental issues to our financial situation, and then I would opt to put it in an account and wait until we can find a better use for it. The only thing I am very opposed to is let's not spend it on new services that we can't afford in the future. We have a very robust underlying budget. We have enormous new resources through state revenue forecast last week from the state's economist. So I'm for many things. I am only opposed really to one thing, and that is to misspend it on services we can't afford in the future.
All right, next we will go to Jerry Cornfield of the Herald.
Let me revisit the Blake decision for a moment. I just want to see if the Senator Braun could give us a heads up on what's going to happen at tomorrow's press conference that Senate Republicans have scheduled, and if any of you have received any specific information from your cities and counties on the impact. There's been a lot of concern about resentencings and refunds and people being let out of jail, but have you received anything specific that's happening in your communities?
Well, I don't want to spoil the excitement for tomorrow's press availability. So that's a coy way of saying I don't know everything that will happen there. But I think it's going to be along the lines of what Representative Mossberger laid out, is how do we get after this in a thoughtful, deliberative way to make sure we address a very complicated issue well. So I don't think there'll be any real surprises there. I think it'll be things that we've said really since the decision was handed down on how we address this problem. As far as your question about specific data from local government, I mean, it depends on what you mean by specific. We've got some data, not all of which I can recite from memory, about the expected cost and the expected backlog. Senator Warnick talked about that some earlier. And I think we've all, I certainly have, I think others have heard that from their local communities, but we're still pretty early in this, and local governments, just like us, are trying to get their heads around a very complicated issue that has effects at many levels, from financial and from budget issues to humanitarian issues. How do we continue to help people who were making progress in a drug court and now are basically cast adrift because of this change in the law?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I'll just add, I think specifically I've heard from my district in that, especially the correction officers in my local area, that when we see somebody who is suffering from substance abuse and we arrest them and put them in a facility, we're giving them 3 meals a day. We're giving them a bed. And so to have to just walk away from that and not be able to take action to do something until we have infrastructure to get them in a facility, which will hopefully help them through a substance abuse treatment, or to get them mental help, it's better than leaving them on the streets. And so I just keep hearing those concerns, as well as law enforcement saying, what does this mean? And prosecutors saying, exactly what does this mean that we can't intervene? And what message is it sending to our youth? I coached for years in high school, and we're sending that it's okay to have possession of heroin or fentanyl or meth or crack. So why would the courts do this? So I have a lot of questions regarding that.
Did you have anything else, Jerry?
Transportation, I just want to go to the budget and the potential for a transportation package. The budget uses about 20 to 25% of the federal funds in both the House and the Senate versions. Be interested if it sounds like you're good with that. Want to make sure. And then on the transportation package, are your caucuses on board with doing a revenue package this year? How big do you want to go, or how small?
Well, I would say that there's even more uncertainty around the size and the potential of a federal package. And when you look at the incredibly damaging impact that a new gas tax has on top of 1, 2, or 3 new carbon pricing schemes. I think you're doing incredible damage to low-income families that commute between hopefully an affordable home and a job. And when we don't know just how much infrastructure spending is going to be coming out of the feds, and indications that I read this morning were that it could dwarf the current recovery package, I'm not willing to do that at this point to struggling families. So I would really like to let these things settle out a little bit. The other thing that I'd like to say is if we get going on culverts and other types of spending that are made possible by these federal funds that we're talking about a few minutes ago, I think we're going to make a real dent in the construction capacity of the state of Washington. And if you want to find a way to halt everything and make everything more expensive, then create a bunch of artificial competition for construction capacity. That ought to be part of our thought as well.
Yeah. So I'd like to address a couple things. First of all, in terms of using some of the federal funds for transportation, I fully support what's in the budget. I would, if it's to, for instance, address the larger culvert issue, I would support even more. I think that's an important issue that can and should be solved as quickly as possible. I don't necessarily agree with how we got to the decision, but I think ultimately it's the right thing to do, and we should get after it sooner, not later. In terms of a package, we have been very supportive of a transportation package, but we don't think that there's new revenue necessary to do that package. We proposed in a balanced budget with no new taxes and without the $10 billion we've just become, we've seen in the last 2 weeks a budget that would drive $24 billion into transportation over the next 16 years. $24 billion, nothing close to that. And that's by moving the sales tax on motor vehicles to transportation. Very logical that when you buy your vehicle, the sales tax on that goes to maintaining the roads and bridges that you drive on. Our budget can absolutely afford that right now. If you look at where we're at right now with the underlying balanced budget, with all the new revenue, this is something that can clearly be afforded. It's the right thing to do to move away from a gas tax that is very regressive. And just to be clear, moving away from a gas tax to a carbon tax or a cap and trade type of a deal that is also just a fancy gas tax and is also very regressive doesn't fix the problem. What we proposed really fixes the problem with significantly more money than has been proposed anywhere else. Well, I guess I take one exception. I think Representative Pai had a proposal that was 28 over 16 years, but also involved even higher gas taxes. So we've absolutely been committed to a transportation package, but we don't think there's new taxes necessary to do it.
All right, next we will go to Keith Eldridge.
Hi, thanks for taking the question. A growing number of states are opening up vaccinations right now. Texas is the latest to do it, joining Ohio, Michigan, Connecticut, and Utah. Would you be in favor of the governor opening up vaccinations to everybody much earlier than the May 1st deadline?
Yes. So a simple answer is, look, we've been at this for a while. The folks that were in the early phases have had, in some cases, a couple months to sign up and get their vaccinations. I heard earlier that we're about 70% for our citizens over 70. So in my mind, I think it's the appropriate thing. The real goal is to achieve herd immunity. If right now we're having some difficulty getting folks to take the vaccines, allowing folks that are in the later phases to get in line, and maybe you have a situation where they can get in line, but the folks in the higher phases can always go to the front of the line. I think that would make sense, but we should just look for ways to more effectively get these vaccines out to the citizens of the state of Washington. I think that's a reasonable move.
And I agree. I agree. I just had my second vaccine Friday. had a bit of a reaction to it, but I am in the age group where I qualified for it. But if I'm hearing numbers that not all our vaccines are getting out to our folks. And I made the appointment through the regular channels and went through the local vaccine clinic. And I feel that we need to encourage whoever would like to have one of those vaccines have the opportunity to get one and not be held back because of their age or whatever. But I agree. I think we need to use every single vaccine that comes to our state of Washington, no matter whose arm it goes into.
Yeah, when there's several 100,000 doses that are, in inventory, I think we should want those in people's arms. And at the same time, we should be redoubling our efforts, I think, to reach people that are open to being vaccinated, because we're not supporting mandatory vaccination. But if you're open to vaccination, we should find a way to get it to you. And it is troubling that there are disparities by race, disparities by location. Rural people are underserved at this point. So I would say make this as available as possible and have all kinds of efforts to make sure that those people who might be vulnerable because of some comorbidities or because they just lack access are not left behind. I think that's absolutely critical too. And then if we can soak up that inventory and get those in arms, we're that much farther ahead in terms of getting ourselves fully open and saving lives and hospital resources.
Did you have a follow-up, Keith?
Yeah, that's for Representative Mossbrucker. Yesterday started phase 3. April 12th is decision day on whether counties can stay in. If you look at, especially in your area, Yakima County, if it were to be held today, they're at 224 per 100,000, and they would have to go back in phase. Are you worried that could happen? Over at Whitman County, they're in the 400s. Are you worried that the governor's phasing is going to be a challenge for a lot of districts or a lot of counties?
Thank you for the question. And yes, very worried. We've struggled with numbers in Yakima. We're happy that he's not doing regionalization so we can be responsible. Yakima did an amazing job of stepping up and masking when they were one of the worst areas for a while. The local government there and the leaders in the community led by example, and they got to a really great place. The governor's office actually has been doing a great job of meeting with them weekly and bi-weekly to help give tools to them to catch up, and they did. They did a great job. So once again, Yakima's really been hit hard for numerous reasons, and we have to do everything we can to build those businesses back. I don't know the latest number of how many businesses we've lost, but it's extraordinary, and it's very heartbreaking because many of those businesses can't afford to come back, or they didn't qualify for some of the dollars that were from the federal government to help lend a hand. So watching that closely, but you have a really core group of people in Yakima that are leaders in the area that are amazing, locals that live there. So just hopeful.
All right, we have time for one more question. That will go to Jeff Pogula of Como Radio.
Yes, excuse me. Back to the issue of Blake, I guess for a refresher for any of our listeners, what remains to be done on any of these bills? Because you've got a number of them that have been issued or introduced, but so many deadlines have passed. What can you actually get done before the end of the session?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. We're trying to see, we've seen bills go through the legislature at extraordinary speeds, and we've seen them bypass financial committees. So we're just hopeful that this will rise to the priorities of the majority party and that they'll take this into consideration to help those who are struggling, as well as the local law enforcement agencies, the courts. You've heard the fallout of State v. Blake, which I think was a surprise to most people, is really has to be an eminent concern. We have to look at this because instantly we're in a state of position where we could have more people addicted. We could have the ability to pull people out of a place where they are safe, where they're possibly in a substance abuse program, and let them go. Example, unfortunately, is I have a constituent who has a son. He's been suffering with addiction for 3 years, and he's overdosed 3 times in that time. The latest one, she sat by his bed for 2 weeks, not knowing if he was going to live or not. He's in his 20s, and she called me when this ruling came out a day after and said, this can't be true, that his friends, which were incarcerated for drug possession, were getting out. And she said they were calling her son, Jeremy, and saying, guess what? I'm out. I'm going back to the game. I can't wait to get back in the game. So she was in tears saying, here's these people that were his group of friends who were also using and supplying to him that are going to be back out again. And there's got to be a way to fix that. I had to tell her that it was true, that they will likely be let out into a system that's not there for them to get help. And again, remember, people have to want to get help. So even if we do have the structure in place, the behavioral health and the substance abuse structure, the whole system in place, and we have the money to do that, which we hope the majority party decides that's a priority, then we have to figure out how do we get that person who's addicted to want the help that they need to be healthy. And I don't have the answer to that, but we're looking for it. And this bill these bills are all an attempt to figure out a path forward as soon as possible.
Yeah. Do you have a follow-up, Jeff?
Just briefly, in something to end on, Senator Braun, we're going to see that corduroy jacket on the Senate floor before the end of the session.
Let the suspense build for a while. It was just a teaser. You never know what might happen.
We're going to have to deal with some hard feelings, though, because he compared that to my jacket.
Nothing compares to that jacket, so I apologize if I gave offense. So, hey, one thing I just want to follow up on the comments from Representative Mossberger. The simple answer is we absolutely can address this State v. Blake decision in the time we have left. There are rules, but I think if there's political will, and I believe there should be, we can waive the rules. We can work between chambers to make something happen. And whether it's a full comprehensive solution, which I'd like to see if we can figure it out, or something that at least gets us in a stable situation so we can think through it and work with our local partners to get this right for the long term. One way or the other, we can get this done if we're willing on both sides of the aisle. And I certainly believe we are on this side of the aisle.
And in closing, I'd just like to offer the leaders some remarks, if you'd like. Representative Wilcox.
Well, thank you, John. It seems like we really covered the waterfront today. I appreciate the good questions, and I'm just wishing that we were all in the same room. Can't wait for that to happen. Believe it or not, I miss all of you, and I hope it's mutual. But we've got nothing but little committee work, and then a lot of floor action coming up. I think the budgets are going to be crucial, and I just want to say there's a lot of specific things that are important about the budget, but there is nothing more important, I think, right now than trying to be disciplined and staying on a sustainable path. Because if the flood of federal dollars creates something that is unsustainable in the future, that will be the problem that dominates the next 5 years of legislative time.
Yeah, I would just add again, I think the most important thing remaining for us is to get the budget right. And we have a very, very unique situation this year, which takes, I think, additional thought. And I'm hopeful that what we see on Thursday from the Senate and then after that from the House is thoughtful, and we'll certainly provide our best feedback on that, whatever it is. The other thing I wanted to mention, this isn't something, I mean, we talked about a lot of things. I don't know that I can add to all the things we covered, but I wanted to acknowledge some of the comments yesterday from the media availability with the Senate Democrats. There are comments at the end by Senator Billig and I think Senator Leas that talked about bipartisanship. and their interest in getting opinions from the minority and differentiated between Washington and the national scene, and even from Oregon to the south. And I thought that was a nice comment, and I appreciate. And, we not surprisingly have different opinions on what bipartisanship looks like, and when they are and when they're not, and we all feel passionately about the things we support. But I thought that was genuine, and I think it recognizes that we are really trying to do things differently here, even when we disagree, that we can work together, build comedy, build respect for one another, and hopefully, as a result, get better solutions for the people of Washington.
Senator Warnick, go ahead.
Oh, well, we have covered so many topics, and as my position on the Ag Committee, I'm very aware of impacts that many of these bills have had on our agricultural community and the decisions that have had on our agricultural community. We are still working to find a solution for the overtime pay for our ag workers. We need those agricultural workers. We want them to be safe. We want them to be well paid. But we also have concerns that another court decision could impact the people that hire those farm workers. So working hard to finalize 5172, the ag overtime bill, and make sure that all workers are covered under that and all farmers are covered under that for for all aspects, especially the seasonality aspect. Other states have figured out how to do that. I think Washington State can figure out how to do that as well.
I just want to say thank you so much for your time today and coming to let us talk to you regarding different topics and answer questions. I think there was a law enforcement representative who shared with me that it's never okay to do nothing. And State v. Blake asked you to do nothing. So it's a priority to make sure we find the balance, as Senator Braun talked about, with the community and with law enforcement, and trying to make sure, how do we find an answer to make sure that we respect rights, but at the same time, we keep people safe if they're not able to make themselves safe. And it's heartbreaking when you see people who are struggling with this addiction. So we're asking that it's a priority, and we're also reminding everyone that if we're not safe, then nothing else matters. Not the taxes that we do, not ag, not economic development. We have to be safe, and public safety has to be a priority. It's been a priority for Republicans since I've become a legislator, and I'm sure that it will continue to do that. So I really appreciate you taking time to let us discuss our thoughts today.
Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you.
Bye.